Disney hardly need an introduction. They've been around for over a century, have been a household name all around the world for generations, and in recent decades have seemed bent on taking over the entire entertainment industry. With four of the five highest grossing media franchises of all time currently being under their ownership. I guess what do you expect from a company founded by a megalomaniacal wannabe dictator? However, despite how much they've expanded, they're still probably best known for the thing that put them on the map in the first place: animated film. Welcome to what is probably going to wind up being the longest one of these videos that I'll make. And today, I'm going to be reviewing and ranking all 62 animated feature films released as part of the Disney animated canon. To quickly explain how this video will be structured, as always, I will be talking about the movies in order of release, with a dedicated ranking segment at the end, and I might not go out of my way to spoil every single one, but if you care about that sort of thing, be warned. There is one thing that will be a little different this time. Like Pixar, Disney is commonly divided into a number of different eras, and this time I want to also provide separate, smaller rankings for each era, which I will display on screen once I finish covering the last film in that respective era. Now, let's not waste any more time. Despite its name, the Golden Age is definitely pretty far from my favorite Disney era. In most of the movies, the animation itself is incredible, but nearly everything else about them kinda sucks, to be frank. For most of these, my thoughts are basically going to boil down to the animation was great, but I wish the animation was at the service of a better movie. Snow White was Disney's first animated feature film, and unfortunately, I don't really have a whole lot to say. It's a pretty straightforward one-to-one adaptation of a 10-minute fairy tale, with the runtime padded out by a bunch of singing and dancing. In many ways, I actually find it to be the total opposite of Toy Story. When I talked about that movie, I made the case that it would still be a great movie even if it didn't pioneer 3D animation the way it did. Snow White, on the other hand, I feel really only stands out among Disney's filmography today because it's the first. Maybe a few decades ago, before the Disney Renaissance especially, when there were a lot less Disney movies and a lot less animated movies in general to choose from, this would have held up a lot more. But at this point in time, there's not really a whole lot this movie offers that hasn't been done far better. Again, at least the animation is great, and it has aged far better than the animation in Toy Story. I did say in my Pixar video that I didn't think the animation in the original Toy Story looked that dated, but the animation in Snow White hasn't aged at all. When I was watching this as a kid, I had no idea it was from the 30s. Again, though, don't really get a whole lot out of it aside from that. I don't think the original Pinocchio story was written as a singular narrative so much as it was a series of semi-episodic ventures, and that really comes across in the Disney adaptation. I haven't read the original book, but I'm assuming what they did was adapt the beginning, two of the most iconic chapters, and the ending, and didn't really put a whole lot of thought towards logically linking any of it together. I mean, at one point, Pinocchio was just given a magic letter to let him know where to go in order to advance the plot, as if he's playing an open world video game. There are some pretty memorable scenes, but none of them are connected to anything. They all just happen, and then by the next scene, they're pretty much forgotten about. Honestly, it's kind of a shame that serialized TV shows, especially animated ones, weren't really a thing at the time this was made, because this probably would have worked far better as one of those. Once again, the only thing I can really praise is the animation. It looks great. I just wish it was at the service of a better told story. Fantasia is the first, and in my opinion, the only half decent example of a different sort of movie Disney would continue to make throughout the 1940s. There isn't a through line or a narrative at all, really. It's just a compilation of what are essentially animated music videos for a bunch of classical music. So, to give my thoughts on each segment, from a grander perspective, I think it was a pretty poor choice for them to open the film with what are easily the two slowest and most abstract segments because it doesn't really give a great impression for what the rest of the movie is going to be like. So, I don't know why they did this. This is probably the most iconic segment from this compilation, and it's one of the better ones. The animation and the music complement one another quite well, seeing as in this case the song was written with the story in mind. This one is probably my personal favorite of the bunch. It tells a pretty compelling story, and they do some pretty interesting stuff with the animation, especially later in the runtime. Controversy aside, this is still probably the weakest segment outside of those first two. It's very simplistic and cutesy, and goes on for way too long. This one's pretty fun. It's basically like a classic Looney Tunes short. This one is completely carried by the animation, which carries it pretty high because the animation is incredible. As a complete piece, Fantasia is pretty mood dependent for me. Sometimes I watch it and really enjoy it, other times I feel kind of indifferent. But it's definitely on the higher end of my Golden Age ranking. Dumbo somehow feels too long and too short at the same time. The movie is barely over an hour long, and nothing is given any time to be developed. Dumbo and his mother are given about 60 seconds together before they get separated. Dumbo flies one time with the magic placebo feather they give him, only for that whole plot element to never come into play again. And there's no falling action. The movie abruptly ends immediately after the climax. At the same time, however, so much of the movie is just padding. Most of the songs don't advance the plot at all. The best song in the movie, When I See an Elephant Fly, is pretty much the one exception, and there are several jokes that they drag on as long as they possibly can. Even the animation, while still good, doesn't really stand out in the same way as the animation from the other Golden Age movies. Does that make it the weakest movie from this era? It's kinda hard to say because while the plot structure and storytelling still has its issues, it's definitely better put together in that regard than Pinocchio is. Ranking this filmography is gonna be kind of tough because there are a lot of movies like this that I just don't feel that strongly about. So, Bambi just might be the best looking animated movie ever, and that alone pretty much automatically makes it the best movie of Disney's Golden Age. The use of color and lighting does an amazing job at capturing the beauty of the setting in a way I've never quite seen accomplished anywhere else. However, even aside from that, this one also has far better storytelling than any of the previously mentioned movies, with some surprisingly effective emotional beats, and the forest fire scene that serves as the climax is easily the best scene, not only in this movie, but in this entire first era of Disney films. It's like a good Fantasia segment, with more stakes to it because we're actually somewhat familiar with what's going on and the characters that it's happening to. Probably the main thing holding the movie back would be that the quality of the voice acting is pretty mixed. Some lines are delivered fine, other times the delivery is pretty meh.
No. Come with me.
I remember it standing out as quite weird when a random bird character with about 20 seconds of screen time suddenly has a really good voice performance.
He's almost here. I can't stand it any longer.
Thankfully, this isn't a very dialogue-heavy movie, so the pretty so-so performances were a lot less annoying than they could have been. This hardly makes my very top tier of Disney movies, but it's definitely the Golden Age movie that I'd be most willing to revisit. I'm just gonna say it straight away, the Wartime Age sucks. These movies barely even count as movies. All of them are just compilations. With Fantasia, it at least felt like there was some sense of deliberation towards it being presented in this matter, but with these, it really does just feel like you're watching a bunch of totally unrelated shorts and music videos one after the other. I mean, hell, even The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, which was quite literally a compilation of existing shorts re-released as a feature film, feels more like it was intended to be released as a feature than any of these do. If you're planning on skipping this portion of the video because you've never even heard of any of these movies and do not care about them, I don't blame you. However, I'm a completionist, so here I go. I honestly do not know why Saludos Amigos is considered to be part of the animated canon. Not only is it barely feature length, only being 42 minutes long, but only around half of it is animated. It's very difficult to describe what this movie even is conceptually. Sometimes it's a documentary about a scouting trip to South America, sometimes it's an anthology of animated shorts, sometimes it's an edutainment film. The best way I can describe it is, it feels like a collection of bonus features. Like, these were meant to be supplemental to a proper movie Disney made that was set in South America, but no such movie exists. And that's really about all I can say. We're one movie in, and I can already tell this is going to be my least favorite era to talk about, as well as my least favorite era in general. As I said, the wartime movies barely even count as movies, and as such, it's quite difficult to discuss them as if they're movies. The Three Caballeros is very weird. I don't even think I have to critique this one. I feel like just describing the sequence of events that takes place does it for me. So, Donald Duck is in this red void that I think is supposed to be his house. And for the first 10 minutes, we're just watching him watch this random short about a penguin that has nothing to do with anything. After that wraps up, he's visited by his two Latino boyfriends. One of them is a character they gave a whole formal introduction in Saludos Amigos. The other one, I'm pretty sure this is his first appearance, but the movie acts like we already know him anyway. And the three of them spend the rest of the runtime imagining themselves going to various locations across Latin America and acting horny towards a bunch of live action women. In the last few minutes, everything completely trips out and I have no idea what's going on, and then the movie ends even more abruptly than Dumbo did. Normally, this is the exact sort of thing I like to avoid doing when talking about a movie, just describing the plot beat by beat, but that's all I have to work with here. What am I even supposed to get out of that? This also sometimes feels like it was intended as a sort of edutainment tool, but then it had a seizure partway through. I guess I can say that out of all the wartime movies, this one is the most like an actual movie, if only because it stays on one plot for most of the runtime, even if that plot is total nonsense. Ugh, at least those are probably the two hardest ones to talk about, done and over with. For some reason, Make My Music is very difficult to find, being the only movie in the animated canon that isn't on Disney Plus. I had to borrow a very old DVD copy in order to watch it, and even that was missing one of the segments, which I had to watch separately on YouTube. I'm not sure why they seem so determined to hide it. There doesn't seem to be anything especially problematic about it, or anything like that. Nothing on the level of some of the other films that are still widely available. For the most part, it's just really boring. Like Fantasia, this one is also essentially just a bunch of music videos segmented together. This one is just stupid. It's about 7 minutes of build up, only for the punchline to be a generic boomer joke about hating the person you're married to. Not much really happens in this one, it's practically just a slideshow of still images while a melancholy song plays. This one really is just an animated music video for a contemporary song. Is this not just the same as that other blue one? It's also a slideshow of nearly still images, with a different but similar melancholy song playing. I really don't like this one. I can't place my finger on it, but something about the way the characters are animated makes me uncomfortable. And like the Martins and the Coys, it's just a needlessly long build-up to a joke that isn't funny. Is this one even animated? This just looks like a live-action recording of, well, two silhouettes. I feel like the only reason this story exists is to teach kids about the concept of musical motifs for characters, because not a whole lot happens in the actual plot. For me, the most interesting part of watching this was finding out where I recognized the Wolf's theme from. Thanks to this random Letterboxd review with 2 likes for pointing that out to me. Another one that's pretty much just a contemporary music video. I guess at least dancing anthropomorphic instruments are a bit more visually interesting than dancing people. What a strange concept for a love story. Aside from that, there's nothing especially memorable about it. Another one that's just stupid. Every character is voiced by one guy, who I don't think is a very talented voice actor, and the plot makes absolutely no sense. These wartime movies are really quickly burning me out. I feel like I'm talking about 2010's Pixar again, except somehow a lot worse. Fun and Fancy Free is another one that doesn't really give me a whole lot to work with, so for the most part, all I can do is describe it. There are two segments. The first one is about a bear, with one of the most nonsensical plot reveals in history. At first, he thinks the girl bear doesn't like him because she slaps him, but then it's revealed that in whatever bizarro universe this story takes place in, it turns out if a bear slaps you, that means they like you. Someone wrote that. How does that even come to mind? The second is a retelling of Jack and the Beanstalk with Mickey, Donald, and Goofy. When you really think about it, Jack and the Beanstalk is one of the dumber fairy tales out there. A guy essentially gets scammed, but then the scam actually turns out to be real and massively beneficial to the main character. What kind of message is that? This one has a live action framing device, which is pretty much just there as padding, because it adds absolutely nothing to the story. I don't know why all of these wartime movies have so much stuff that's in there just to pad time. Who the fuck cares if goddamn Fun and Fancy Free is 50 minutes instead of 70 minutes? Next movie. Melody Time is... ugh, another one of these music video compilations. Let's just bang through this one really quickly. Probably the most bog standard music video out of this compilation. I don't even know what's going on in this one. Bee versus plant instrument hybrids, whatever. I actually think this one's okay, it's pretty cute. The song is stupid, and I hate the character design. Literally, all I have written in my notes for this one is the word trees. Donald and his Brazilian boyfriend are horny for live-action women again. This is just the exact same story as Paul Bunyan, with a stupid ending. Alright, that's it. Thankfully, that's the last of these music video compilation movies for quite a long time. The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad is, without a doubt, the best movie of the wartime era, and it's pretty much entirely because of the first segment. The story of the Wind in the Willows actually has enough going on to fill the runtime they give it, and that climactic fight scene is pretty creative and funny. This segment is about the only thing to come out of the wartime era that I might willingly revisit. Unfortunately, the movie as a whole is kind of dragged down by the second segment. I don't know how this guy could be described as a great character, as the narrator says, because he's just a guy who likes women and food and money. That's probably about as milquetoast as a male protagonist can possibly be. This segment absolutely does not justify its runtime. Basically, everything that happens before the last few minutes is filler. The first segment on its own is decent. As a complete package, the movie is pretty mediocre. I am really happy to be done talking about the wartime age. However, I don't know if out of the frying pan into the fire is quite the right phrase to use because I do think the Silver Age is considerably better than the wartime age. Not that that's an especially high bar, but I still don't feel that strongly about most of the movies that came out during this time. I promise, I will eventually get to movies that I have a bit more to say about, but for the most part, this is another era that's gonna be a bit of a slog to get through for me. Hopefully this is the last one of those. Of all the well-known classic fairy tales out there, Cinderella might be the shittest one. Nothing is earned in this story. When the fairy godmother shows up halfway through the movie, it essentially renders the entire first half of the movie pointless. Everything she'd been trying to do is just given to her by magic. Also, the way the conflict is resolved is stupid, even by the standards of fairy tale logic. The movie even kind of acknowledges that the glass slipper plot point makes absolutely no sense.
But sire, this slipper may fit any number of girls.
That's his problem.
But they do it anyway, so whatever. Many of the movies in the Silver Age have a similar problem to some of the featurettes from the Wartime Age, where the story they're telling just doesn't have enough to it to fill out the runtime. So much of the movie is just padding, mostly random shenanigans with the mice. I don't even know what their deal is. Half the time they speak in relatively coherent English, and the rest of the time they basically talk like minions.
She's nice, very nice. That's a better.
Come on now. Zook, zook, zook. Zook, zook.
Pretty much the only thing I like is the comedic dynamic between the king and the duke. It is pretty funny watching the duke try to have a civilized conversation while the king is actively trying to murder him. Aside from them, the movie is really dull. I've never really gotten Alice in Wonderland. This is one that I never especially liked, even as a kid. There isn't much of a plot, it's mostly just random things happen on the screen, Alice gets annoyed at it and walks away, repeat for an hour and 15 minutes. It can be moderately entertaining at times, watching the insane, psychopathic characters interacting with one another, but that only carries the movie for so long. Especially when, at times, the movie will stop and suddenly act like there actually is a plot going on that I'm supposed to be taking seriously. Much like Alice herself, eventually I get a bit tired of the nonsense and would like to know what the point of what I'm watching is. And then it all turns out to be a dream anyway, so who cares? Yeah, I really hated that ending as a kid. It's probably on the higher end of my Silver Age ranking, but I promise you that is not saying much. Peter Pan is okay. The fact that I even think it's decent probably puts it in the top 5 movies I've talked about so far. A lot of the movie is carried by the villain, Captain Hook. The voice performance, the comedic facial animation, and the way the character could go from 0 to 100 in an instant were all a lot of fun. And he's also great at bringing out both the funnier and the more interesting traits of the titular character. The rest of the movie, I'm mostly pretty indifferent to. My only real criticism would probably be the racism. I don't normally like to talk about this sort of thing, partially because I don't consider it my place to do so, and partially because I don't think it immediately disqualifies any artistic merit or entertainment value a movie has, but this movie seriously just does not shut up about it, to the point where it actually kind of gets on my nerves.
Blackfoot tribe. Belongs to the Algonquin group. Quite savage, you know. Now remember, the Indian is cunning, but not intelligent. Make Big Chief heap glad. Well, he certainly doesn't look heap glad.
No dance. Get 'em firewood.
I really wish I had more to say, but that's just how this period of Disney is for me. I'm beginning to remember why I was initially so reluctant to do this marathon back when I started this series. Of all the Wartime and Silver Age movies that I don't have a whole lot to say about, Lady and the Tramp might be the one that I have the least to say about. The only emotion I experience while watching this movie is boredom. It's probably about as bog standard a romance movie as you can possibly get. The whole thing feels like it's just going through a checklist of plot beats. This is the part where they meet, this is the part where they have a montage, this is the part where they have a fallout, so on and so forth. There's nothing to especially dislike about it. To me, it's one of those movies where it just exists. Sleeping Beauty is, in a few ways, kind of a repeat of Cinderella. The plot isn't nearly as stupid, but it has the exact same issue of not really starting till halfway through the movie, with everything before it just being preamble they added because they couldn't really think of a way to extend the plot of Sleeping Beauty to a feature length. At the point where Maleficent successfully casts her spell on the princess, when the entire first half of the movie was spent on the steps the characters took to try and avoid this happening, they literally might as well have just had one of the characters look at the screen and say, "Everything you just saw was pointless. Here's where the actual plot of Sleeping Beauty begins." At least the filler wasn't as annoying here. The fairies are far more likable than any of the characters who took up screen time in Cinderella. However, also like Cinderella, the way the conflict is resolved makes absolutely no sense. They spend the entire movie talking about how unstoppable Maleficent is and how they can't use their magic to defeat her, and then they use their magic to defeat her. I know it can feel nitpicky to talk about plot inconsistencies in a fantasy movie aimed at families, but could you at least try and make it make sense? It's a lot better than Cinderella, but it's still not one I especially care for. 101 Dalmatians is pretty great. Yeah, we're what, 17 movies in, and I'm finally talking about one that I especially like. I can't say she carries the whole movie for me in this case, because I do really like the rest of it as well, but easily the best part of the movie is the villain, Cruella de Vil. Her voice and her character design are both iconic, and I love her pettiness and short temper. A lot of her interactions with the rest of the cast are comedy gold. Another thing I like about this movie is that I think it goes to show that not every story needs moral complexity. Sometimes it's nice to watch good characters just being good. Seriously, humanity should strive for the level of camaraderie and community that the animals have in this movie's world. Even the human owner characters, who in most of these talking pet movies only really serve as a plot device, are pretty fun, especially Roger. They really play up the like pet, like owner sort of humor with him, and I love his dynamic with Cruella, where they're practically in competition to see which one of them can despise the other more. Yeah, for me, this is not only the best movie of the Silver Age, but easily the best movie in the entire canon so far. Also, just a fun fact, this movie takes place in the same universe as Lady and the Tramp. Several characters from that movie make cameos in this one, including the titular pair. Alright, back to stuff that's more typically expected of the Silver Age. The Sword in the Stone is another movie whose core issue is that the story they're choosing to adapt just doesn't have enough to it to justify the feature-length runtime. I don't know why so many Disney movies from around this time have this specific problem, but this might be the most egregious example of it. Quite literally, nothing that happens before the last 10 minutes has any impact on the plot. Arthur becoming his brother's squire, forgetting the sword in the inn, and pulling the sword from the stone to use in its place. Nothing from earlier in the movie leads into that. It just happens. It's kind of like Dune Part 1, where the entire movie is a first act, except in this case there's no follow-up, it just ends. And at least in Dune Part 1, the runtime was padded out with a bunch of world building and character setup that was actually somewhat interesting. In this movie, it's just a bunch of random TF shenanigans with no through line. It's a shame, honestly, because a movie about a kid trying to live up to the reputation of his own future self sounds kind of interesting, but the movie just wastes a bunch of time and cuts itself off before that story can really begin. The Jungle Book is the last of the Silver Age movies, and what do you know, it's another one that I think is pretty whatever. My main issue with this one is that it gets really repetitive. Mowgli meets an animal, they promise to let him stay in the jungle, they have a song about it. Some of the songs are pretty good, some of them are pretty forgettable, and then Bagheera forces things to move along. This exact same sequence of events repeats 5 or 6 times before the movie ends with both a total anti-climax and a total anti-emotional climax. Like, seriously, these guys were supposedly your friends, and you're probably never going to see them again. Do you not have even the slightest emotional response to this? If there were any notable positives for this movie, it would probably be the character Bagheera. I did enjoy his constant annoyance with everything they ran into, and I empathize with his impatience with the other characters, but it's not quite enough to carry the movie for me. There's a reason that the Bronze Age is also sometimes known as the Dark Age, as it's seen as a bit of a low point for Disney. In the latter half of the Silver Age, you may have noticed the switch to a cheaper to produce animation technique with a rougher appearance, and during the Bronze Age, not only did this continue, but they also began to recycle animation from previous movies, or sometimes even from earlier within the same movie. It was so noticeable that I picked up on it even as a little kid. And that's not the only thing they recycled. Between the 50s and the 80s, Disney had a tiny circle of voice actors they continuously reused. I actually might make a supplemental video showcasing this, because it's pretty fun to notice. And this peaked during the Bronze Age, as the circle of actors only became smaller, and it became harder and harder not to hear the other characters they've played. It is an experience to hear Tigger's voice coming out of a Chinese racial stereotype.
Oh boy, fellas, let's rock the joint!
In spite of all of that, though, The Bronze Age is actually one of my favorite eras. I quite like the aesthetic that the rougher animation provides, and several of my favorite movies in the animated canon came out during this period. I might be somewhat biased. While I saw most of the animated canon movies that existed at the time as a kid, there are five that I would say I grew up with especially closely. And out of those five, three of them came out during the Bronze Age. But I think I can make a proper case for them. And hey, my top ranked movie from the Bronze Age is not one of the ones I grew up with. So there. For the most part, the Aristocats is just alright. The plot does take a little while to get going, and when it does, it's merely a better version of the Lady and the Tramp story. I think the two leads in this one have far better chemistry, and the romance feels less like it's just going through a checklist of tropes. Combined with a somewhat less good version of the 101 Dalmatians story, the villain in this one has his moments, which I'll get to, but overall he doesn't remotely compare to the previous Pet Napper Disney villain. These elements would amount to something that I might moderately enjoy, but probably wouldn't be anything I'd find worth revisiting. What really takes the movie a cut above that to me is the inclusion of the Napoleon and Lafayette versus Edgar scenes. Even if everything else about this movie was garbage, these scenes are so goddamn funny to me that I've always found the movie worth revisiting, if not just for them. They're a perfect combination of crazy slapstick and more subtle built up gags. They're not the most plot relevant things in the world, but I'm not especially bothered by filler when it's actually entertaining. Maybe that's highly subjective, maybe that's just nostalgia bias talking, but whatever, it's my ranking. It's kind of funny that, in spite of many other attempts, the Disney animated version with anthropomorphic animals has pretty much remained the definitive movie adaptation of the Robin Hood story. I really like this one. I'm gonna say straight away, this one actually might have been in my very top tier of Disney movies, if not for one pretty prominent issue I take with it. I do find the recycled animation to be pretty distracting in this one. Walk cycles are one thing, but when a character repeats a very complex set of motions that I already saw them do earlier in the movie, it does take me out of it a bit. This was clearly the movie most affected by how cheaply Disney was producing animation at the time. Pretty much everything else about the movie, which, just for the record, includes the animation when it isn't distractingly recycled, is great. This movie is really funny to me. I think the comedic voice performances in this movie are some of the best of all time. The villain Prince John being a real highlight in that regard.
Robin Hood. Get out of that if you can.
And I find so many lines in this movie so quotable.
You mean I'm being dismissed?
You heard his mightiness. Move it, creepy. Get lost. Be gone, long one.
I am also just kind of a sucker for one or two characters versus everyone fight scenes that are played comedically. Is this the movie that invented the gag of a fight scene just turning into American football, or some other popular sport, or did that exist before this? Like 101 Dalmatians, the story is pretty simple and isn't exactly morally complex. Except for bootlickers, I guess. But it works for what it is. The main characters are all really likable and endearing, Robin is a great trickster hero, and even the background characters have their moments. I always like seeing random bits of camaraderie. And you know my opinion on the animated canon is improving when I think this is only the second best movie from this era. Winnie the Pooh is very nostalgic for me. I obsessively watched not just this movie, but just about anything related to this franchise when I was younger. However, it is something that I would have a bit of a hard time recommending to someone who isn't a child. It's not that it can't be enjoyed by anyone older, but more than anything else in the animated canon, it does feel like it was made very specifically with young kids as the intended audience. There is plenty to praise. I think the voice performances are absolutely iconic. Other voice actors have tried, to varying degrees of success, but I don't think anyone could ever really live up to the original cast. I've always enjoyed the really meta storytelling as well, and despite also being based on a similarly episodic storybook, The movie feels far better paced than Pinocchio does, probably because it's more honest about what it is and presents itself as a borderline anthology. I'm not sure this was intended. As I mentioned earlier, the movie was originally released as three separate shorts that were later combined into a feature, but the end result came out better. I don't know how high I could put it in my ranking today, but this property will always hold a somewhat special place for me. The Rescuers to me feels a lot more like something from the Silver Age. There's nothing especially annoying or unlikable about it, I just find it really dull. For something that's supposed to be an adventure movie, and even an action movie to some degree, the whole thing is really quiet and slow paced. There are some sequences that could be kind of fun on paper, but are executed so dryly. The two main characters are probably among the blandest in any Disney movie. Their designs are really unexpressive, and they aren't really given any traits or dynamics beyond the most milquetoast stuff you can imagine. The most lively part of the movie is the villain, and even she just comes across as a really toned down version of Cruella de Vil. It's not the worst movie from the Bronze Age, but it's easily the most forgettable. The Fox and the Hound is not only easily the best movie from Disney's Bronze Age, but I think it's one of the best in the entire animated canon. I think this movie has some fantastic tone balancing. In many ways, this is probably Disney's most downer movie. For me, easily the saddest scene in any Disney movie is the scene where Tweed is forced to abandon Todd in the woods. I mean, considering the full context, for both of these characters, this is effectively the second time they've lost a family. And it doesn't even have that idealistic an ending. The characters do part ways on good terms, but after the ending, they probably don't ever see each other again. But it's not like Grave of the Fireflies or Ringing Bell. It tells this relatively bleak story without the whole thing feeling completely miserable. Parts of this movie are really funny and lighthearted, and I think the two tones help each other to become more effective. This is a difficult balance to get right, and when tones clash inappropriately, I feel it can really bring a movie down. But here, it's done very well. Additionally, Amos and Chief are a great, very different approach to Disney villains. I like that they have a believable, and at times even somewhat endearing family unit with Copper. It really helps sell his decision making in the later parts of the movie. Also, Amos in particular is really funny, while still doing a great job at serving as a threat. Again with the tone balancing. If I were to have any minor gripes, it would probably be that, with this movie having a somewhat more serious tone than the other Bronze Age entries, I do find the recycling of voice actors from previous Disney movies to be a little more distracting than usual here.
Oh, that's him all right, Dickie. That's him all right.
I think it would be pretty unfair to take any points off the movie for that, though. I love this movie, and without a doubt, I think it's the best one I've talked about so far. One more characteristic of the Bronze Age that I haven't discussed yet is that this was pretty much the first point in history that Disney didn't basically have a monopoly on theatrical animated features, as other animators such as Ralph Bakshi and Don Bluth, as well as overseas entries from places like France and Japan, were rising to prominence around this time. I bring this up because the Black Cauldron very much feels like Disney's take on Ralph Bakshi's style, especially the movie Wizards. With the darker tone, the high fantasy setting, and a lot of design choices and animation techniques that feel really different from the rest of their catalog, but would probably fit right into Wizards. I also bring this up because this movie doesn't really offer a whole lot to talk about aside from that. It might be the most generic fantasy movie ever made. I have to apologize to Bernard and Bianca, because this guy is, without a doubt, the blandest protagonist in any Disney movie. I couldn't even tell you a single trait that defines him. The supporting cast all do absolutely nothing, and the villain somehow manages to be just as, if not more, uninteresting than the protagonist. He really doesn't pose much of a threat at all. It just takes one person willing to sacrifice themselves by jumping into the titular evil MacGuffin, and he and his entire army crumble. That feels like a pretty low investment to defeat all evil ever, especially when that same character gets brought back to life less than 10 minutes later. This movie was so expensive and had such a troubled production and performed so poorly at the box office that it's frequently known as the movie that almost killed the studio entirely. Imagine that being your legacy. Being the movie that was such a critical and commercial failure that you almost brought down Disney animation, and not even turning out to be some sort of underrated gem in the process. You were just bad and boring. There are far worse Disney movies, without a doubt, but I don't think any of them could have a more scathing reputation than that. If I'm honest, I'm not entirely sure what The Great Mouse Detective was trying to be. There are so many plot points that are far too stupid for the story to be taken all that seriously, yet it rarely feels like it's trying especially hard to be funny, either. You have scenes that feel like they could be taken out of a Sherlock adaptation that's taking itself somewhat seriously, but then you also have scenes like, with no obvious irony, the antagonist doing that cliche Saturday morning cartoon villain thing of using a needlessly convoluted contraption to kill the protagonist instead of just finishing him outright. He doesn't even have one of his henchmen stay behind to make sure the thing actually works. And then the ending pulls a glass onion and has any actual mystery solving pretty much get negated. Spoilers for that movie as well, by the way. They catch the villain in the act, but then the villain outmaneuvers them and succeeds in covering up their tracks, but then they just brute force their way to victory in a way that has pretty much nothing to do with anything that happened before. Like, come on, in a detective story, if the good guys win, I want it to be because they outsmarted the villain. That's such an important part of the appeal to me that both of these movies are missing. This one is a classic to some. Personally, I don't really get the appeal. Oliver and Company does have a few things going for it. I think the Oliver Twist story, with this presentation, could easily have worked, and the movie has some pretty great music. Some of the songs aren't too memorable, one of them I would say is outright bad, but why should I worry? No exaggeration, top 10 Disney songs, maybe even top 5. However, there are a number of pretty prominent issues with the movie, and I think most of them stem from a core issue of the movie simply being too short for the story it's trying to tell. It's barely over an hour long, including the opening montage and end credits. As a result, there are so many scenes that I feel were important for establishing character motivations, or communicating emotional attachments they developed, or whatever, that were either rushed through or skipped over entirely. Like, in Dodger's first appearance, he uses Oliver and attempts to ditch him, but next scene, they instantly move past that and suddenly we're best buds. Easily the biggest example, though, comes during the inevitable second act low point. The entire conflict of the movie winds up boiling down to Oliver having to choose between two sets of characters he's had about 5 minutes of screen time each with. The way it comes across in the movie, Oliver hung out with these characters for maybe an hour in universe, and most of them exchanged maybe 2 or 3 sentences with him, if even that much. I simply am not able to buy that they would be this upset that he decided he wants to live somewhere else. Man, I still like the Bronze Age, but it really fell off for me after The Fox and the Hound. The Renaissance is what most people tend to think of when they think of Disney at their peak, and yeah, I'm basically forced to agree. As much as I love several of the movies from the other eras, there was no point in time where Disney's output was as consistently great as it was between 1989 and 1999. There's only one movie from this era that I wouldn't consider to at least be decent, and I think most people can already guess which one it is. But I'll talk about that when I get to it. Of all the movies in this video, The Little Mermaid probably has the biggest disparity between how good I remembered it being and how much I enjoyed it when I rewatched it for this marathon. There are a few reasons why I enjoyed it so much more. For one, I'd forgotten just how great the soundtrack was. I do think it starts a little slow. The first two songs are probably the two weakest ones in the movie, but the rest of the soundtrack easily makes it the best so far in this marathon. Let's put it this way. Every previous movie in the animated canon has put together maybe 2 or 3 songs that I sometimes go out of my way to listen to when I'm not watching the movie they're from. The Little Mermaid alone has several. Ariel was also a far more compelling protagonist than I remembered. A lot of her scenes were quite emotionally effective, and I don't know if many movies have done a better job at selling me on a character's choice to make a Faustian bargain. However, one of the main ways the movie improved from how it was in my memory was in being a lot funnier than I remember. Beyond having some amazing character interactions, my personal favorite probably being Sebastian's entire emotional breakdown while trying to keep Ariel's secret. Even the music can be hilarious at times. In addition to just being a really good song, I love how extra the Kiss the Girl scene gets as it goes along. Starting with just Sebastian and a few quiet instruments, and having like 100 singers and instruments join in as the song progresses. It's so over the top and great. I don't know if this one's quite top tier for me, but it's certainly up there. I'm not entirely sure why The Rescuers, of all things, was the first and for a very long time the only movie in the animated canon to have a direct theatrical sequel. 13 years after the fact, no less. But I'm kinda happy it got one because I actually quite like The Rescuers Down Under. It improves on the original movie in just about every possible way. It's faster paced, the animation is far more expressive, it all around has a lot more energy, and while Bernard and Bianca still aren't winning any awards for being the most compelling Disney protagonists, their characters are definitely an improvement in this one, Bernard especially. You could take any random shot of him from this movie, and within that one shot, he'll probably convey more personality than he did for the entirety of the first movie. However, easily the biggest improvement is that this one has a vastly superior villain. His voice performance is great, he's got a funny dynamic with his pet lizard thing, and I found a lot of his decision making to be surprisingly well written. Remember earlier with the Great Mouse Detective, I talked about the cliche of the villain using some convoluted means of killing the protagonist instead of just getting it done with? This movie does something similar, but it's actually justified by the writing. Earlier in the movie, he faked the kid's death using crocodiles, so it just makes sense that he'd use them when killing him for real, rather than just shooting him or something. It's still not a great movie. I have some criticisms with it. Firstly, I'm definitely not a fan of the cliche guy wants to propose but keeps getting interrupted joke. At least in this movie, it's kept to a few brief gags instead of being given an entire subplot, unlike some other movie I'll get to later. It does also end pretty abruptly, leaving some plot threads unresolved. I think we can assume these things get cleared up later in the timeline, but as of the moment the credits roll, the animals the kid was imprisoned with are still locked in the poacher's base, and the kid's mom still thinks her son is dead. Still, this may not be one of the more popular entries from the Renaissance era, but honestly, I like it quite a bit more than some of the others. To me, Beauty and the Beast holds a similar place in the Disney animated canon that Megamind held in DreamWorks' catalog, or that The Incredibles held in Pixar's catalog. It's one of the most beloved ones. In fact, it was the first of only 3 animated movies ever to be nominated for Best Picture. And I think it's good, but I'm just not quite on the hype train for it. The animation is good. The songs are good. Gaston is a pretty fun, very memeable villain. I do have my gripes with the romance. Even ignoring the very easy Stockholm Syndrome interpretation that could be taken away from this story, I think the Beast should have been called out far more for his attitude being just as big as, if not a bigger contributing factor than his appearance as to why no one liked him. Like, a lot of the things he does in the earlier parts of the movie would not cease to be red flags if they were just being done by a human man instead. Also, it has one of the cheesiest ending lines ever, and not in a good way. Might be one of my more controversial ranking choices, but honestly, I like Rescuers Down Under better. Aladdin is one of the better Disney movies at being a straight comedy. Like The Little Mermaid, even the musical numbers themselves can be hilarious. I like the Prince Ali scene for a lot of the same reasons I like the Kiss the Girl scene. It's just so extra that it's hilarious. And I don't think this really needs to be said any more than it already has been, but I'll say it again anyway. Robin Williams as the genie truly is legendary. Not only because the performance is so funny, but also because it's so varied. If this had been his one role ever, it alone would solidify him as one of the greatest voice actors of all time. Also, he isn't brought up nearly as often as Robin Williams is, but I think Gilbert Gottfried is really funny in this movie as well. All that being said, while this is relatively high in my ranking, it's not quite near the very top, mostly because I'm just not super invested in the rest of the movie besides the comedy. It's got a couple of sweet moments, but for the most part, I just consider it to be serviceable framework. I also think that the way the conflict is resolved is kinda dumb. The whole ticking time bomb element with Jasmine's story was that the law said she had to marry a prince before her next birthday, and then this is resolved by the Sultan changing the law. Like, what was stopping you from doing that earlier? Another one that I think is good, but not quite great. Sometimes a piece of art can be so ubiquitous with pop culture that it's kinda difficult to even talk about. For me, trying to write a review for The Lion King is basically the animated movie equivalent of trying to write a review for The Godfather or The Mona Lisa. At the moment, I probably wouldn't consider any of these three things to be among my favorite ever in their respective medium, but at the same time, what can I really say against them? Because in many ways, they really are that great. And anything I do say in favor of them, I'm more or less just preaching to the choir. In the case of The Lion King, it is a testament to how much presentation matters. When broken down to its bare elements, the story is just a bunch of familiar Shakespearean tropes with lions, but the animation, the music, the performances, and the sound design all sync with one another in a way you would never think was possible on a project of this scale. They were all clearly designed from the ground up to be paired with one another, and they turn this movie into something so much greater than the sum of its parts. This is the best Disney soundtrack, without a doubt. There are other individual songs from Disney movies that I really love, but there are few, if any, other Disney soundtracks where I would sometimes just listen to the entire thing on its own, beginning to end. This is also another movie that does the whole tone balancing thing quite well, particularly with how they use the characters Timon and Pumbaa. They come into the story at the perfect moment. I don't think they would have worked nearly as well as characters if they were introduced at any other point. If I were to have any criticisms that aren't just the result of me feeling a little overexposed to the movie, I'm not that big a fan of Matthew Broderick as adult Simba. Compared to the far more iconic performances from some of the other characters, his just feels kinda generic. That's pretty much it, though. It's not my personal favorite movie in the animated canon, but I have absolutely no issue with this one being the fan favorite. As you probably guessed earlier, Pocahontas is the only Renaissance-era Disney movie that I would consider to be subpar. Let's just ignore the various controversial historical inaccuracies and just focus on how it is as a movie. Now, to be utterly fair, there are some pretty good scenes. This was the movie where Disney was truly attempting to put their best foot forward, and sometimes that does show. A few of the songs are pretty good, and the whole Colors of the Wind sequence looks great. The problem with trying to criticize this movie is that it's just so forgettable. Like always, I tried to write down my initial thoughts on the movie immediately after I watched it, and even then, I could barely remember anything about it. The two main characters are total blocks of wood, with unexpressive animation and really dry performances, and the story just feels like what the mathematical average would be if you took the plot of every Hollywood movie about colonization. Aside from the Colors of the Wind scene, the only scenes I can even picture are some random shenanigans with the animals. Probably because those scenes were at least a bit more lively. Pretty much, my biggest takeaway from this movie is always going to be this was the movie that Disney was putting all of their faith in, while Lion King was the one they left with their B team. The Hunchback of Notre Dame can be a pretty disappointing movie to talk about. A lot of it is amazing. It has one of the best villains, it has one of the best villain songs, the entire climax and ending is one of the best scenes in any animated movie, let alone the Disney animated canon. If Disney ever wanted to make a really great, completely seriously toned movie, this was almost it. Unfortunately, it's got a pretty serious problem holding it back. Contrary to the previously discussed Fox and the Hound and The Lion King, The Hunchback of Notre Dame is a pretty prime example of how not to mix tones. I'm not entirely talking about the gargoyles when I say that, but I am mostly talking about the gargoyles when I say that. And I'm someone who's normally not that bothered by these comic relief supporting characters. Hell, I don't even mind the goddamn minions that much, at least in the first two Despicable Me's. So why are these guys the exception? It's hard to draw an exact line between where attempts at tone balancing work and where they don't, but one thing that definitely helps is when, regardless of the tone of the scene, you still care about what the characters are doing. To compare Hunchback to the other two examples I gave, all three of them have a more comedy-oriented scene that comes pretty quickly after the lowest point in the movie. In The Fox and the Hound, after Todd is forced out of his home, it's easy to be invested in his attempt to integrate himself into his new one. In The Lion King, after Simba believes he accidentally caused his father's death, it's easy to be invested in him trying to cope and move on. In The Hunchback of Notre Dame, after Frollo attempts to burn an innocent family alive and has one of our other main characters shot nearly to death, it's a little difficult to be invested in the gargoyles giving Quasimodo dating advice. I don't really have any major criticisms aside from that. I'd be pretty comfortable branding this movie an almost masterpiece. Hercules, I just think is alright. Sometimes there's only so much you can say for why a movie doesn't work as well for you as others do. I do think this movie is much better than most of those, but trying to talk about it, I'm getting a pretty similar feeling I did when trying to talk about the Wartime or Silver Age entries. It might have one of the weaker soundtracks out of the Renaissance era musicals, in my opinion, and even then, I don't really like saying that because that part is still pretty great. Definitely the best thing about the movie. It does have one really awful song that sticks out like a sore thumb, though. I do also find the humor in this one to be pretty hit or miss. Normally, I like Danny DeVito's performances, but I don't particularly like his character in this. One of the only things I especially liked besides the music was the villain, Hades. He has a good design and voice performance, and plenty of memorable line deliveries. Everyone loves it when he says,
Guys, relax. It's only halftime.
at the exact halfway point of the movie. Overall, though, for me, it's probably the weakest Renaissance era movie aside from Pocahontas. You know, I've noticed while doing these marathons that 1998 was a surprisingly goated year for animated film. For a long time now, Mulan has been my favorite movie in the entire animated canon. I love nearly everything about it. I think Mulan is one of the best Disney protagonists. Her journey of self-discovery is great, and I love how much the animation is used to convey her character. From the opening number, where she's basically like the player character in a Rhythm Heaven game, to the scene where she enters the camp attempting to mimic the exaggerated swagger of a stereotypical man. The supporting cast are all great, and I enjoy watching Mulan slowly gain and then try to maintain their respect. And more than anything else, this movie contains one of the best tonal shifts ever. I believe everyone who's seen this movie already knows what part I'm talking about. The burned village scene is genuinely amazing. The way the songs are abruptly cut off and then never return for the rest of the movie, the way even the more comic relief characters have nothing to say in the wake of this, the devastation is probably conveyed about as effectively as is possible for a mainstream PG-rated movie. I guess if I'm daring to call this one my very favorite out of 62 movies, I should respond to some of the criticisms people have with it. One is the character Mushu. I do agree he can be a little bit much at times, but I find him funny more often than not. And unlike, say, the Gargoyles, he at least knows to tone it down at the story's more serious moments. Another common complaint people seem to have is that the villain is a lot more downplayed, and not super memorable as a character compared to the rest of the Renaissance era villains, and my response to that one is, so? Are you telling me when you watch other war movies like Saving Private Ryan or Dunkirk, you're expecting a complex villain with deep personal ties to the main character? Why do different rules apply when it's a Disney animated movie? He serves his role in the story as an opposing warlord, and that's all that was required of him. Neither of these things prevent Mulan from holding my number one spot. The only thing that might is a pretty close second that I'll get to soon. With Tarzan, I have a few criticisms. I do think it takes a while to get going. I feel like that early sequence with the characters as kids only went on so long so they could justify making one of those weird midquel movies they'd started doing around this time. Also, for something that's being portrayed as one of the biggest emotional payoffs of the movie, I think Tarzan gaining Kerchak's respect could have used more time, especially when the detail of the attack at the end, basically being Tarzan's fault, kinda gets glossed over. Aside from that, I think this one is great. The real heart of the movie to me has always been Tarzan's relationship with his mother, Kala. That emotional payoff was really effective. I think the Phil Collins soundtrack was great and really fits the montage style of storytelling. Jane is a pretty funny supporting character, and I love the way that 2D and 3D animation were combined for this one. It allows for some really fun and crazy camera work during the action scenes, and is often used to achieve a sense of scale that probably would have been difficult for either animation technique to pull off on their own. The reasons I like it may be pretty simple and difficult to elaborate on, but it's still probably my second or third favorite movie in the Renaissance era. The experimental, also sometimes simply known as the post-Renaissance era, really reminded me of my DreamWorks video. Not only because some of the movies that came out during this time took some pretty obvious influence, which I'll get to, but also because of the massive variance in quality these movies have, with this era containing some of the best movies Disney has ever made, as well as some of the worst animated movies of all time. I feel like this is going to be the most interesting era to discuss. Fantasia 2000 was not released in 2000, but in 1999, because apparently some stupid fucks in New York couldn't just wait 2 more weeks. Just like the original Fantasia, and that wartime era stuff, I'll be talking about each segment individually, but before I do, I just have to say that the live action breaks in between the main segments are really annoying in this one. These scenes were presented in a very matter-of-fact way in the original, while in this one, the hosts all keep trying to be funny and doing a really bad job at it. Anyway, they repeat the mistake of the original Fantasia by opening on what is easily the most abstract segment, I guess as a sort of homage. At least this one is shorter and faster paced than those were. Very slow, and the animation is kind of dated. I don't think the technology was there yet for 3D animation to be used for pure spectacle. This is one of the better ones in this compilation, but I'm not as crazy about it as some other people seem to be. Another really slow one with pretty unimpressive 3D animation. This is the only one in this compilation that I would say I outright like. The animation and music complement one another very well, and it's made even more impressive by the fact that apparently it was all animated by a single person. Too bad it's also by far the shortest of the bunch. It might have been kind of cool if they'd reanimated this one, but rather it's just copy-pasted from the original. In the 1940 Fantasia, I ranked it close to the middle of the segments, but this time round, it's the second best one. The music does not fit this one at all. It's barely synced with it, and the mood doesn't even come close to matching. Who decided that the best piece of music to complement an adaptation of Noah's Ark was that music they play during graduation ceremonies? This one probably has the best animation of the bunch, but I don't find the music itself that memorable. This is another one that a lot of people like, but I'm just not crazy about. And that's it. Definitely do not think this one is nearly as good as the original, which I already didn't love. Why is Dinosaur considered to be part of the animated canon? According to Disney's own rules, photorealistic animation counts as live action. In fact, this movie uses a lot of live action backgrounds. It's more of a live action movie than the 2019 Lion King is. I don't have any real point to make about this, I just thought it was funny. I guess I also just needed something to talk about, because other than the factoid that it's Disney's first primarily CG animated movie, there's basically nothing of note about it. The story is just the same bog-standard Land Before Time thing they always do with dinosaur movies. The main character is orphaned and his home is destroyed in some natural disaster, so he must travel across some treacherous landscape with a group of quirky supporting characters in order to get to safety. It seems like the entire appeal of this movie was meant to be the animation, and now that just looks dated. I wouldn't say there's any reason to watch this unless you're a completionist like myself. The Emperor's New Groove is, without a doubt, the Disney movie with the largest disparity between how I feel about it and how everybody else seems to feel about it. It has a few things going for it. Some of the jokes are kind of funny, some of the presentation choices are kind of clever, but unfortunately, everything I do like is overshadowed by how much I absolutely cannot stand Kuzco. Everybody has a certain character that just ruins an entire piece of media for them, and for me, Kuzco is that character. I don't find him funny or endearing, I just find him really, really, really annoying. And this includes after he supposedly improves as a person. You can imagine how I feel about him before then. And honestly, the amount of patience Pacha has with him makes him almost as annoying to me. Like, just be done with trying to help this guy. He has repeatedly demonstrated to you that he's not worth it. The movie is, for lack of a better word, carried by Kronkanisma. I use that word pretty loosely because even their scenes can be pretty hit or miss for me. The misses usually being times when there's a complete lack of subtlety as to what the joke is supposed to be. But most of the jokes I do like somehow involve them. That makes this the third movie I've talked about in this reviewing and ranking series where I thought a character played by Patrick Warburton was one of the only funny parts. I think he needs to pick better projects, but clearly that's just me because I'm obviously in the minority with this one. Is there a whole lot that needs to be said about Atlantis? It's not an earth-shaking masterpiece, but it's a simple, fun, pulpy action-adventure movie. It kind of feels like a cross between Indiana Jones and Castle in the Sky. There were a lot of pretty cool sci-fi fantasy designs, and the supporting cast were mostly pretty likable. A few of them were a bit too gimmicky for me. When I eventually do my video on every nominee for Best Animated Feature, I suppose I'm also going to have to talk about the snubs, of which this is probably the first notable one. I haven't seen Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius yet, but I have a pretty strong feeling that I'm gonna wind up thinking Atlantis is better. In some ways, my thoughts on Treasure Planet are pretty similar to my thoughts on Atlantis, it also being a pretty simple and fun treasure hunting action adventure movie. However, there's more to say here because my thoughts on Treasure Planet are a lot more varied. Some parts of this movie are really great, and could easily propel this movie into a higher tier. Particularly, the characters of Jim Hawkins and Long John Silver have such an engaging dynamic throughout the entire movie. It really makes John Silver one of the more interesting and complex characters in the animated canon, and the way it comes to a conclusion is so satisfying. However, this movie does also have a lot more holding it back, particularly the humor. A lot of it feels really pandering, the main example that always comes to mind for me being that one alien who speaks in a fart language called Flatula, and some of the characters. Morph could already be a bit much at times, but Ben. Holy shit, Ben. He doesn't ruin the entire movie for me the way Kuzco does, primarily because he has a lot less screen time. But whenever he does show up, he's always way too loud, way too overanimated, and he barely even serves a purpose in the story, so I don't know why he's even in the movie. The good definitely way outweighs the bad here, and it does probably wind up ranking a bit above Atlantis, but like Hunchback, its ranking is disappointingly low compared to how great it could have been. Okay, sorry Little Mermaid, but I have to take it back. Lilo and Stitch has the biggest disparity between how much I liked it in my memory and how much I liked it when I rewatched it for this video. This movie is top tier. Lilo and Nani are probably two of the most believable humans I've ever seen portrayed in a mainstream animated movie. I really feel like these two are just people I could know in real life. The way they talk to each other, the way they fight on and off, Nani's attempts to accommodate Lilo while trying to balance out her own life. A lot of it does feel like how it would play out if the story of an unprepared young adult becoming the sole guardian of a troubled little kid was coupled with the story of an alien's journey of self-discovery and found family. The Aloha Oi scene, another candidate for being the saddest scene in any Disney movie. However, similar to several of the other movies I ranked among my favorites, this one also balances tones really well. Another reason this one improved it so much compared to my memory was in being, like The Little Mermaid, a lot funnier than I remember. Obviously, Stitch and the other two aliens that are trying to recapture him are all hilarious, but I find the human characters just as funny. From Nani's instant mood switching, to the social worker's stone-faced reactions to literally everything, even getting hit in the face with a book.
New job. Model citizen. Good day.
Also, I just have to say that Stitch probably has one of the best and most appealing character designs in anything ever. Seriously, I would probably rank him pretty close to Pikachu in that regard. There really isn't anything too significant that I dislike about the movie. While I'm a bit more comfortable leaving Mulan in my top spot for now, mainly because I'm more familiar with it, this one has a pretty decent chance of taking the spot in the future. To me, Brother Bear is a decent movie with a potentially much better movie hidden within. It's not as good as some of the previous movies I've said similar things about, like Hunchback or Treasure Planet, but it's still got plenty going for it. The stuff with the human brothers, the stuff with Kenai and Koda, generally the things that were meant to be the primary focus of the movie, pretty much all of that I really quite liked. It's the stuff they use to pad the runtime out that I take more of an issue with. Whoever wrote this movie seemed to be completely incapable of incorporating jokes naturally into scenes that move the plot forward. Instead, in order to incorporate the joke, the plot is stopped, sometimes for upwards of a minute at a time, and if the joke doesn't wind up being funny, then that's a pretty big problem, because you effectively just wasted time for no reason. Another issue is the soundtrack. There are some great songs, but it really isn't helped by the fact that this is the second movie in a pretty short amount of time to heavily rely on a Phil Collins soundtrack, especially when the quality of this one is a lot more inconsistent, and it also isn't used as well. Most notably, there's a scene late in the runtime where I'd kinda rather hear what the characters are saying, especially when the little bits we do hear are quite effective, but instead it's mostly presented as a montage with one of the more mediocre songs on the soundtrack playing. And yeah, if you were paying attention earlier, you may have noticed that this is another one that I may have some nostalgia bias for, but even looking at it as fairly as I can, I don't think it's bad, I just think it's flawed. Home on the Range, more than anything else from this era, feels like the result of Disney attempting to channel DreamWorks. This movie probably would have been in pretty early production around the time of the release of Shrek, and I do not think that is a coincidence. It might explain things like the much cruder, edgier tone than you would expect from a Disney movie, from the opening line of the movie being a tit-size joke,
Yeah, they're real. Quit staring.
to plot points like those bulls pretty explicitly offering to help in exchange for sex,
Maybe they can help
Why,
us.
sure we can help you. Maybe we can help each other.
to that opening scene, which probably has more burp sound effects than the entire rest of the animated canon put together. It might also explain things like the inclusion of in-universe annoying characters. I don't know if I could name a single example of one in a Disney movie before the 2000s, but now in the current era, there have been several. If you were to ask me if this movie does either of these types of humor nearly as well as Shrek does, my answer would be no. The crudeness and edginess always just comes across as really try-hard, and they keep trying to pack way too many jokes into each scene, and as a result, even the scant few that could be moderately funny don't have a chance to land. And that horse is one of my least favorite characters ever. I might hate him even more than Kuzco. The only reason I have difficulty deciding who's worse is because the horse at least doesn't ruin the movie he's in, since the rest of the movie around him is already pretty shit anyway. And then the plot is just nonsense. The villain is this guy who steals cows by hypnotizing them with a magical yodel. Yeah, I know that's a really weird sentence to say, just take my word for it. However, one of the main characters isn't affected by the yodel. Why this yodel can hypnotize cows, and why this one particular cow isn't affected by it, is never explained. Even though that's what the entire conflict and resolution hinges upon. Her explanation for why she isn't affected is that she has perfect pitch, even though she's a terrible singer. Like, is that supposed to be funny? I don't get it. There are a couple of small things that save it from the very bottom tier. The animation and the character design are a lot better than most movies that are otherwise this awful, and the three main characters have a dynamic that could work. Most scenes with just the three of them were tolerable. That's it. And I'm not even in the clear because somehow what might be the two very worst entries in the animated canon came out back to back. Chicken Little is as bad as the worst of DreamWorks, and believe me, that is saying a fucking lot. Normally, even in the very worst of Disney, you can at least rely on the animation and character design being competent. Both of those things are straight up awful in this movie. The main character has one of the most unexpressive designs I've ever seen in animation. That pig is just an amorphous blob with a head on top. Honestly, the best designed character in the movie is probably the ugly duckling one, because at least with her you can say she's supposed to be ugly. The background characters recycle the same 12 or so designs over and over, and I don't think I've ever seen a movie where a character model reuse is more distracting. One of the standout examples for me is when one of the kids getting on the school bus has the same model as the mom that just walked by with her kid. The writing is some of the worst I've ever heard. Every other line is just some random reference to a movie or song, and they somehow managed to write a completely incompetent sports movie. Like, how do you even mess that up? It's one of the tropiest subgenres there is. Nothing is earned. It's not like the main character is being shown up. He clearly just sucks. I'm legitimately on the bully character's side when she's upset that he's getting all the praise for one lucky hit after she carried the team the entire season. And it's not like any of this even matters, because nothing that happens in the first half of the movie has any effect on the second half of the movie. Just like some of those Silver Age entries, what might as well be the inciting incident happens nearly an hour in. At the same time, however, I'm only ever able to remember that first half all that well. There's an alien invasion, because yeah, the first half definitely set up that anything like that might happen, and everyone's just running in circles, and somehow this goes on for about 45 minutes. I could not for the life of me tell you what fills that time. And then the bully character's punishment for being a bit of a dick earlier is basically getting lobotomized, so that's nice. A lot of people probably consider the dad character to be an elephant in the room that I haven't mentioned yet, and yeah, he sucks, but he doesn't really stand out to me. Everything in this movie sucks. I've honestly tried to think about it, and there really is nothing in this movie that I could argue is good. Meet the Robinsons has some pretty clever elements to it, and I could see myself liking it a lot more if I got on more with its tone and humor, but I don't. I do enjoy all of the surprisingly subtle foreshadowing in the first half of the movie, and the way the various twists are hinted at, but while all this is going on, I just find the humor to be way too hyperactive, with a lot of random plus loud equals funny, the dinner scene being the worst of all for this. Also, I know a lot of people consider it pretty nitpicky to talk about time travel logic, but it really bothers me in this movie. If it just created a bunch of plot holes, that would be one thing, but here it really hurts the messaging of the movie. Like, in a story where one of the main intended messages was to keep moving forward and choose to learn from past mistakes, it is really ironic that the villain's entire conflict is resolved by going back in time and fixing his mistake, pretty much completely undoing any arc that character could have had. That being said, for the most part, I'm able to see the appeal of this one, it just isn't for me. Between this and the original Toy Story, I guess I just find characters that are deluded into believing they're superheroes to be really funny. A lot of people say that Bolt is basically just the Truman Show with a dog, but there is a lot that sets them apart. The Truman Show was about a character in a TV show slowly figuring out the nature of his constructed reality, while Bolt is a movie about a character that still believes their TV show is real going on an adventure in the real world, and the resulting humor is quite different. And weirdly enough, compared to The Truman Show, this one actually delves a bit more into the sadder side of a character realizing their entire life up to that point was a lie, and facing the possibility that everyone he thought cared about him was actually just an actor. I find the titular character surprisingly compelling for a delusional dog. The John Powell score is amazing, and I think Mittens is a great deuteragonist. I like her voice performance, and she's got a lot of really well delivered lines, and the scene between her and Bolt where he finally accepts reality, genuinely really good scene. I'm not sure why this one is rated so low on Letterboxd compared to most of the others. The only things below it are some of the wartime era junk and the infamously terrible ones. Does it just come across as too kiddie for most people? Yeah, I did really love this one as a kid too, but I don't think my current liking for the movie could be explained away as nostalgia bias. I didn't even know what the plot of this movie was back then. I thought Bolt actually had superpowers. I guess if someone were to ask me what the most underrated movie in this marathon is, this would probably be my answer. For simplicity's sake, I'm just gonna say the revival era is the current Disney era, even though I don't actually know if it's generally considered to be so. I think some people believe a new era started in the late 2010s, but whatever. The most obvious characteristic of this era is that it's the one where 2D animation from Disney finally died out. There were a couple more at the beginning of the revival era, but as of now, there hasn't been one in over a decade. I obviously don't think 3D animation is inherently worse, but I do miss the variety. In terms of quality, there was still a lot of variance from movie to movie, and while it wasn't nearly as extreme as it was during the experimental slash post-Renaissance era, there were definitely still some standouts, both for better and for worse. The Princess and the Frog is effectively the only taste we ever got of what a modern 2D animated film from Disney would be like. I mean, I know that upcoming Winnie the Pooh thing is also 2D animated, but that barely counts. It's a follow-up to an older movie and it's barely an hour long. The animation and music are easily the best parts, but it has some other things going for it. Dr. Facilier is a fun villain, and the movie does have a lot of great comedic timing and line deliveries.
Allow me to introduce myself. I am Prince Naveen.
The main issue I take with the movie would probably have to be the pacing. Generally, it's got a really strong first act, a pretty strong third act, and a second act that's mostly pretty meh. I'm not even exaggerating, whenever I rewatch this, I usually find that in that middle act, there are songs and even entire characters and subplots that I straight up forgot were even in the movie. I do also think that every other character's insistence that Tiana should just get married could be a bit much at times, especially in this middle act. It's not the only way a person could ever possibly be happy, you know? While Disney had been making 3D films for a while at this point, Tangled is the first one that feels more in line with their traditional output, being a pretty one-to-one adaptation of a classic fairy tale, with a bit more added to it to make it feature-length. And honestly, it's probably far better at doing that than most of their actual traditional output. The stuff they add to the story feels significantly less like filler than anything from the Silver Age, partially because it's actually entertaining. The chameleon and the horse may also just be comic relief animal sidekick characters, but unlike, say, the mice from Cinderella, they're actually funny, and partially because a lot of it is used to heighten the emotional impact of the story by giving these characters more to them. Gothel is probably the last Disney villain to serve as one of the highlights of the movie. Her manipulation of Rapunzel under the guise of protecting her actually allows for a fairly interesting dynamic. You know, instead of the villain just being some boring asshole who isn't even revealed until the last 5 minutes of the movie. Also, this is another one with a great soundtrack. Kind of weird, though, that in a musical, my favorite song might be the one that plays during the credits. This is it. As of now, Winnie the Pooh is the last 2D animated feature that Disney ever made. I'm not entirely sure how it relates to the 1977 movie. Is it considered a sequel, a reboot, a spin-off? I have no idea. It almost feels like a remake of that straight-to-video Winnie the Pooh movie from 1997, Pooh's Grand Adventure. It has effectively the same plot. Christopher Robin goes to school, but then Owl misreads a message from him and makes everyone think he's been kidnapped by a monster. Now, I haven't seen that movie in a really long time, but from what I do remember, it does a far better job than this one at telling a feature-length story using these characters, with arcs and a more traditional act structure. The pacing in this movie is completely out of whack. Like the 1977 movie, it's based on a few different short stories, but unlike that original movie, it actually tries to link them all together into one narrative, and the plot structure just ends up being kind of a mess. Pooh's Grand Adventure was also probably helped by the fact that they actually still had some of the original voice cast left for that one. By this one, it's an entirely new cast, and they're clearly trying, but most of the characters sound pretty off to me. I find they all act pretty off in this one as well, mainly in that now all of them are really, really, really stupid. Like, they weren't exactly intelligent in the original movie, but, like, come on.
All of you?
Yes, Piglet. All of us.
All right. Oh, don't forget that.
This is Flanderization if I've ever seen it. Finally, the songs are absolutely terrible. I'd probably just consider the movie subpar if it were merely the points I listed above, but the songs are what make me consider this movie to be outright bad. Wreck-It Ralph is a movie that I've never really gotten the hype for. A lot of the appeal just seems to be cameos and references to popular video games, and I've always found the messaging to be kinda confused and muddled. The intended message of the movie seems to be based around the mistreatment of outcasts, but when conflict arises as a result of this, pretty much none of the blame is placed on the people who were actually doing the mistreating. The way it comes across in the movie, it almost feels like it's saying Ralph was supposed to just accept the poor treatment he was receiving from the other characters in his game. There's like an entire subplot missing where they realize that Ralph was an essential part of their game and that they should have respected that. Also, this movie isn't nearly as bad as that one, but kind of like Home on the Range, a lot of the conflict seems to be based around arbitrary things that don't actually make any sense. Vanellope's conflict is pretty much entirely based around the fact that she can't leave her game because she's a glitch, and that already seems like a pretty arbitrary rule, but then late in the game it's revealed that she actually isn't a glitch. So why couldn't she leave the game then? They don't even try to explain it. Plus, I think the villain is overrated. The twist didn't really add anything to the movie. One of the only things I consistently enjoyed was the character Fix-It Felix. I mean, he does have kind of the same annoying lack of an arc that the rest of the characters from Ralph's game had, but at least he was a bit nicer to Ralph than the others from the start. He also has a really funny voice performance, and most of the best jokes in the movie about video game logic tended to come from him. So yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of this movie. However, it is a masterpiece compared to what they did with this franchise 6 years later. Frozen is a weird case, in that it's somehow one of Disney's most overrated and overhated movies at the same time. The first 20 or so minutes of the movie are actually pretty good, but for some reason they decided to put literally everything that was good about the movie into those first 20 minutes. There are 4 songs during that time, and all of them are really enjoyable, but after that, aside from a brief reprise, there are only 2 more songs in the entire movie, and both of them kinda suck. In that first act, they set up a potentially interesting dynamic between the 2 main characters, only to then have them be separated for most of the rest of the movie. Aside from those 2 really bad songs, I'm not actively annoyed by most of what fills the rest of the runtime, I just have pretty much no response to it whatsoever. And just as a cherry on top, they throw one of the most egregious twist villains ever into a movie that really didn't need a villain at all. Like, honestly, think about it. What does it add to the movie? Remove the Prince Hans twist from the story, and what actually changes? Frozen is, all things considered, one of the most successful single movies Disney has ever made, and it's strange to me that the entire craze started from a movie so not even bad, just meh. There's a pretty good short film hidden within Big Hero 6. All the stuff with Hiro, Tadashi, and Baymax I quite like. Its message about processing grief was fairly well delivered, and they do a good job at making Baymax a likable and endearing robot character without anthropomorphizing him too much. It's basically all of the stuff around them that I don't like. I have a pretty passionate hatred for the supporting cast in this movie, not only because they add nothing to the story, and because their characters are the most cookie-cutter archetypes you could possibly imagine, but they come across as this weird hive mind, and it creeps me out. I don't know if any of them say the word I for the entire movie, it's always we. They go everywhere and do everything together. I don't know if there's a single shot in the entire movie where they aren't all standing within 5 feet of each other. Also, I imagine you already know this. Anyone watching these reviewing and ranking videos has probably already seen Shea Frilla's videos on the same subject, and he has a whole meme about this guy. But the villain sucks. A character who potentially could have been a decent, sympathetic villain gets completely squandered with one line.
That was his mistake!
Easily, the best thing about Zootopia is its world. The animal character designs are all great, and while it has logistical flaws in this regard, out of all the fictional stories that take place in fantasy worlds populated by anthropomorphic animals, this is probably the one that put the most thought into how a world like that would actually function. Also, she's still not a great villain, but of the streak of constant twist villains Disney was infamous for around this time, Bellwether is probably the least bad one. At least you can see what they were going for with her. Commentary on how bigotry is intentionally perpetuated by those in power in order to stay in power. I just think a lot of the execution is kinda clumsy and cheesy. For example, her plan involving a literal potion that makes animals act like their negative stereotypes, that also conveniently has an antidote so everything is fine again at the end of the film. I'm not huge on the humor, either. A lot of it is based around cringe, which generally isn't my cup of tea, and for most of the first half, both of the main characters just come across as kind of annoying to me. I didn't really enjoy their dynamic until they started working with each other willingly. It's alright, but it's probably not one I'd ever actively choose to revisit. You know, except for a video like this. Moana is a movie that's really been growing on me over time. The first time I watched it, I thought it was pretty middling. The second time I watched it, I thought it was pretty good. And when I rewatched it again for this marathon, I thought it was pretty great. And as of now, I think it's easily the best movie of Disney's revival era. This is by far the best looking 3D animation that the studio has done. It's got a great color palette, the way the water looks and moves is simply beautiful, and it also successfully incorporates a variety of styles. There's even some 2D at times. The main duo have a great dynamic. It does have a little bit of Oliver and Company syndrome, where one of them does something pretty shitty in their introductory scene that they never exactly apologize for, but it's a lot easier to believe they'd move past it in this movie. It's partially a character thing. With Maui being an immortal demigod, it's easy to buy his sense of morality would be a bit warped compared to a human. But it's mostly because far more of the runtime is actually spent on the pair of them interacting and slowly forming a bond. Also, as much as people like to rag on Dwayne Johnson, this is one of the few roles he's had where I think he was appropriately cast. The music is all fantastic, probably my favorite work from the infamous Lin-Manuel Miranda, and the soundtrack includes what I would consider to be my favorite reprisal in any musical. Will this movie continue to climb in my ranking the more I watch it? I guess only time will tell. Ralph Breaks the Internet is not good. It barely even has a plot. The vast majority of the runtime is just a compilation of the most obvious, milquetoast, not even jokes, just observations you could possibly make about the internet, with a bunch of random cameos and references mixed in, including a notable one that really did not age well. I feel like I'm back in the wartime era with this one. Because it's barely even a movie, it's really difficult to talk about as if it's a movie. I mean, one of the jokes is just a goat scream, except it has Ralph's face on it. That was probably an outdated meme at the time the first Wreck-It Ralph movie came out. I'm not even exaggerating when I say that the Emoji Movie might have more of a plot than this does. There are maybe 2 scenes in the entire movie where they remember that there's supposed to be a story, and the story has some moderately alright elements during the few moments where they decide to tell it, which is about the only thing keeping this movie out of the very bottom tier, and even then, it still has issues in that regard. For example, easily one of the most forced miscommunication moments I've ever seen. And then the end credits are a rickroll, just as one final insult. Can anyone tell me what the plot of Frozen 2 even is? Like, I am legitimately looking at the Wikipedia plot summary right now, as I'm writing this, and even the person that wrote this article seems to have no idea what is going on in this movie. Elsa's subplot in particular is just total nonsense. Things just kind of happen with no explanation. It comes across like they just had a bunch of concept art that they really wanted to get some use out of, because they thought it looked cool, but had absolutely no idea how to link any of it together, or make it relevant to the characters of Frozen. The other characters besides Elsa pretty much embody the meaning of the term sequelitis. None of them have any reason to be here other than the fact that they were in the first movie. Anna does nothing. The only thing I remember Olaf doing was spending about a minute recapping the plot of the first movie, and I alluded earlier when I was talking about Rescuers Down Under that I especially hate Kristoff in this movie. They also do the guy is trying to propose but keeps getting interrupted joke with him, only this time it is an entire subplot. There are entire long, overly drawn out scenes, and even a whole musical number dedicated to it, and it just ends the same way that this plot always does. Why did they even spend time on this? And apparently 2 more sequels are announced? You couldn't even think of anything else to do with these characters after one movie. Raya and the Last Dragon is almost kind of a repeat of Oliver and Company. The movie has a lot of issues, but I think nearly all of them stem from the fact that the movie is simply too short for the story it's trying to tell. It attempts to establish an entire fantasy world, with a number of different fictional countries and factions with an entire history between them, and tell a whole epic adventure story within that setting, a la Lord of the Rings or Avatar The Last Airbender. The thing is, Avatar The Last Airbender was a 60-episode show, and Lord of the Rings was a trilogy of 3-hour movies. 4 hours if you watch the extended versions, while Raya and the Last Dragon is 1 hour and 40-minute movie. I think that might partially be why the messaging of the movie is so weird and muddled, just like it was in Oliver and Company. The primary message of the movie seems to be pro-trust, and the delivery is heavily flawed. Mainly in how it simply refuses to acknowledge that there's a difference between not trusting someone because of their nationality or heritage or whatever, and not trusting someone because that specific person has violated your trust before. Maybe if the movie gave itself more time and didn't try to cram so much into its story, it could have had a bit more nuance. But the way it comes across, the message is basically, always trust everyone, not trusting people is always bad, even though the last time you trusted that person they screwed you over, and you don't really have any good reason to trust them this time. Anyway, we're nearly at the end now. What's next? At this point, Disney should just have all of their movies be musicals written by Lin-Manuel Miranda, because the only 2 especially good movies they've released in the last decade both fit that description. While the songs are far and away the best thing about the movie, it's not completely carried by the songs. It has a couple of other things going for it. I feel like a lot of this segment is just going to be a repeat of the Turning Red segment from my Pixar video, because this is another movie that joins the better movie about generational family fallout than Coco club. It's still got its flaws in that regard, but again, at least in this movie, the conflict is based around actual problems that the various members of this family have with one another, and results in them having to make proper decisions about what to do going forward, instead of it all being caused by a contrived misunderstanding that could be explained away in an instant. The movie is also helped by being quite funny. The dinner scene in this movie might rival the dinner scene in Shrek 2, and that's saying something. My biggest issue with the movie would probably be the pacing. It takes quite a while to find its footing in that regard. The songs themselves are all great, but some of them are very strangely placed within the movie and don't always feel like they're advancing the plot as much as they could be. Still, this ended up going a lot higher in my ranking than I thought it would when I started this marathon. Strange World might be the most meh movie that Disney has ever made. The plot, messaging, and character dynamics are all exceedingly simple and on the nose, especially the really obvious metaphor for pollution and the environment, but at the same time aren't necessarily incompetent. You know I'm really grasping at straws for things to talk about with a movie when I say that one of the most memorable things about it was the opening credits. The comic book style and intentionally cheesy theme song did, for a few minutes, convey a sense of fun. The rest of the movie, I can't even say I was bored by it, because that would imply I had any reaction at all. Okay, one more movie, then we're finally finished. Wish wasn't as bad as I was expecting it to be. The movie is not good, but the main criticism I kept hearing about the movie turned out to be made in really bad faith. No, the villain is not the villain because he won't grant every wish. In this movie, when people give him their wish, they forget about it, essentially losing a fundamental part of themselves, so he's the villain because he won't grant every wish, and because he refuses to return the wishes he knows he won't ever grant, so that person never gets that fundamental part of themselves back. Could the movie have done a better job communicating his motivations for why he does this? Absolutely. Again, the movie is not good, but that main criticism people have been blasting all over social media simply isn't true. And it's a shame, honestly, because the story actually sounds like a pretty interesting idea, but unfortunately it really falters in the execution. Firstly, the writing is pretty bad. The dialogue sounds like it's trying to be classic, but just ends up sounding overly formal. And while the instrumental tracks for the songs mostly sound pretty good, the lyrics have this recurring issue where they keep trying to force way too many syllables into each line, as well as just not making sense.
It's genetics! Yeah, I got these genes from outer space!
Another issue is the absolutely ridiculous amount of references to previous Disney movies. It's somehow even worse in that regard than Ralph Breaks the Internet. Beyond the fact that Bambi, Peter Pan, and Little John from Robin Hood, and possibly a few others that I missed, all appear as characters in the movie with no justification whatsoever, it actively hurts the plot at times. There's a moment in the movie where one of the main character's friends turns traitor that's actually set up and makes sense for the character, but gets little focus and has no time to be developed because the main character has to have 7 friends for no reason other than to reference the 7 dwarves from Snow White. I will say, though, the second half of the movie does come kind of close to being decent. The plot has found its footing a bit more by this point, and the last 2 songs, Knowing What I Know Now and This Wish Reprise, are both actually pretty good. Well, whatever. Maybe they can do a competent remake of this for their 200th anniversary. Also, this isn't all that relevant to the movie itself, but I do think it is really funny that they make a big show of featuring characters from all the previous Disney movies in the end credits, but then randomly leave a few of them out. I guess I can see why they left out the wartime era junk, because literally no one cares about them. But the Rescuers, Meet the Robinsons, and even the Black Cauldron all have their fans. Like, the Rescuers. I quite liked the second movie, and my mom has a Christmas ornament of Bernard. My only guess as to why these 3 were left out is because they're all based on books that aren't in the public domain. So maybe they either couldn't get or didn't bother getting the rights to use those characters again just for this. But even then, The Great Mouse Detective is here, and I'm pretty sure the Basil of Baker Street books aren't public domain. Anyway, that is all 62 animated feature films released by Walt Disney Animation Studios reviewed. It is finally time to rank them. I've decided to change this segment up a bit from my previous videos, so this time I'll be going through the tiers in order from worst to best, instead of in release order. At number 62, and all alone in the worst tier, is Chicken Little. Moving right along to awful tier, At number 61, we have Home on the Range, and at number 60, we have Ralph Breaks the Internet. Then in bad tier, at number 59, we have Make Mine Music. Number 58, Black Cauldron. Number 57, Fun and Fancy Free. Number 56, Frozen 2. Number 55, Dinosaur. Number 54, Winnie the Pooh. Then in subpar tier, at number 53, we have Saludos Amigos. Number 52, The Sword and the Stone. Number 51, Lady and the Tramp. Number 50, Melody Time. Number 49, Cinderella. Number 48, The Three Caballeros. Number 47, Raya and the Last Dragon. Number 46, The Rescuers. Number 45, Pocahontas. Number 44, Meet the Robinsons. Number 43, The Emperor's New Groove. Number 42, Wish. Number 41, Fantasia 2000. Number 40, Wreck-It Ralph. Number 39, Oliver and Company. Moving on to mediocre tier, number 38, Strange World. Number 37, Pinocchio. Number 36, Dumbo. Number 35, Sleeping Beauty. Number 34, Alice in Wonderland. Number 33, Big Hero 6. Number 32, The Great Mouse Detective. Number 31, The Jungle Book. Number 30, Frozen. Number 29, The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. In decent tier, number 28, Snow White and the Seven Dwarves. Number 27, Peter Pan. Number 26, Zootopia. Number 25, Hercules. Number 24, Fantasia. Number 23, Brother Bear. Number 22, The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. In good tier, number 21, Beauty and the Beast. Number 20, Bambi. Number 19, Princess and the Frog. Number 18, The Rescuers Down Under. Number 17, Aladdin. Number 16, Atlantis the Lost Empire. Number 15, Encanto. Number 14, The Aristocats. Number 13, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Number 12, Treasure Planet. Number 11, Tangled. Number 10, Bull. In great tier, number 9, The Little Mermaid. Number 8, 101 Dalmatians. Number 7, The Lion King. Number 6, Moana. Number 5, Tarzan. Number 4, Robin Hood. And finally, in amazing tier, number 3 is The Fox and the Hound. Number 2 is Lilo and Stitch, and number 1 is Mulan. Do keep in mind that parts of this list are in very loose order, and might be subject to change in the future, but I'm pretty comfortable with that ranking for now. Way back in my DreamWorks video, I said I wasn't sure I wanted to do rankings for Disney and Pixar because I thought most of their output was a bit too middling for those videos to be interesting. When I did eventually make my Pixar ranking, I ate my words. Except for 2010's Pixar, that was about what I thought it would be. For Disney, though, I mostly stand by my original statement. There were a few that surprised me. In fact, shortly after I made my DreamWorks video, I just happened to rewatch Robin Hood and enjoyed it a lot more than I remembered, which was what originally motivated me to make this video. But for most of them, my opinions did not improve. In fact, there were even a few I didn't like as much as I remembered, so out of all the studios I do this for, this might be the one with the most build-up in the middle of the ranking. I guess now is when I usually talk about upcoming stuff from the studio. Later this year, we're going to be getting Moana 2. I did really like the first Moana this time round, but aside from the cast, it doesn't seem like much of the alumni from the first movie will be returning for it, and that might be an issue, especially considering Lin-Manuel Miranda's songs were easily one of the best parts of that movie. Also, I did hear that this was in the same vein as some of those old Disney Toon sequels, being a scrap TV show that they repurposed as a movie. Can't really comment too much on the trailer, it doesn't show a lot. Then there's Zootopia 2, which as of me writing this was only announced pretty recently. There's no confirmed information out about the plot, but since Disney generally likes to be seen as progressive and with the times, I am curious how they're going to handle the whole pop angle. I feel like they have to at least acknowledge the resentment that a lot of the public has against the police, which has only become much more mainstream in the almost decade since the first movie came out. Other than that, no thoughts. The first Zootopia was alright, and until we get more information, I'm just gonna assume this one will also be alright. Finally, I mentioned earlier that there are apparently gonna be 2 more Frozen sequels at some point. The second movie already couldn't justify itself, and I can only see that getting worse. Anyway, I should probably wrap this up before I completely kill my voice. The next one of these reviewing and ranking videos is going to be for Sony Pictures Animation, so be sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for that one. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.